Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
What up, everybody? Welcome to this episode of the Man Cave Podcast, brought to you by our good friends from Hy-Vee and Toys and Ford. Dan Casper here with you as always. And, in this episode of the podcast, we're going to talk Packers-Texans, preview it, key matchups, keys to victory, players to watch, all that good stuff over there. So we got that coming up in the second half of this episode. I actually want to lead off this episode. So Aaron Rodgers was on Pat McAfee in his usual Tuesday, and there was a clip that he talked about, and Pat asked him about, in his post-game presser, kind of talking about how he called out Mike Williams for doing something wrong at the end of the game and such, and you can go see the clip. I can't play it, obviously, for copyright reasons, but you can go and see the clip like on the X and such. And I shared it on my Twitter profile at DANKASPER. And Aaron kind of talks about, holding people accountable and that sort of stuff. And Ryan Fitzpatrick shared the tweets, and he made a point. And I'm going to read what Fitzpatrick said, because this is why I want to go through this topic here. But Ryan Fitzpatrick said, "This response is the biggest thing I don't understand about Aaron. He can be super charismatic. His swagger gives teammates and the ultimate confidence. But why can't he shoulder all the blame in the media and then get behind closed doors with Mike Williams or the whole offense or the whole team or anyone else that isn't doing their job and tell them he needs more out of them?" So I saw that, and I'm like, I got flashbacks to 11 years ago when this whole Jennings thing started with him. And even Donald Driver chimed in a little bit. So go listen to what Aaron said, or maybe you already did. And I have some thoughts on it, because I guess what a question is it kind of, I want to talk a little bit about leadership, but then I guess a question I'd like to ask Packers fans is, does your perception change a little bit? Were you one of those? Because I was one of those that kind of like, no, Jennings, you're wrong. You're wrong. You don't know what to talk about. That's the guy who won you a Super Bowl. He made you better, blah, 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 blah. Now it's like, I kind of have a little bit of a different tune. So that's where I want to lead things off on this episode of the podcast, is talking about this. And Jennings said this in 2013. "I need to go back to my college days where the quarterback wasn't just viewed as oh so great and still prove that I can be successful. A lot of times when you have a guy who creates that spotlight for himself and establishes that and takes a lot of that, it becomes so-and-so and the team. It should always be the team. Don't get me wrong, 12 is a great person. But when you hear all positives all the time, it's hard for you to sit down when one of your teammates says, man, come on, you've got to hold yourself accountable for this. It's hard for someone to see that now, because all they've heard is I'm doing it right, I'm perfect. In actuality, we all have flaws." Now, Donald Driver had this to say after Jennings, who's trying to maybe clarify some of the stuff that Jennings was saying. And he said this in an ESPN radio interview back in 2013. This is from Donald Driver, beloved Packer. Quote, "We've always said that the quarterback is the one that needs to take the pressure off of everyone else. If a guy runs the wrong route, it's easy for the quarterback to say, hey, I told him to run that route, than for the guy to be like, well, I ran the wrong route. Sometimes you ask Aaron to take the pressure off the guys so we won't look bad, but he didn't want to do that. He felt like if you did something bad, you do it. But I think that's the difference. You want that leadership, and I think sometimes you may not feel like you got it. You have to earn that respect at the end of the day, and I think that's what Greg was probably referring to. He's a nice guy. I think that's what you have to respect. I played with him 5 years, so I was able to experience everything he went through. I saw when he first got drafted, he came in with a chip on his shoulder in that draft, and it shouldn't have been Alex Smith taken number 1 overall. That's what the guy is. I've always told Aaron, don't forget where you come from, because the people are the ones who put you on that pedestal. You didn't put yourself there. I think that's what we are learning now. I'm not saying he's a bad guy. I think he's a great guy. I'm friends with Aaron. And the driver one is, in my opinion, eerily similar to what Fitzpatrick said. Where Driver said, we've always said the quarterback is the one that needs to take the pressure off everyone else. So I guess what it boils down to is Rodgers right for going in front of a media, going in front of, reporters and saying, hey, Mike should have did this, should have did that. So-and-so should have did this, should have did that. Instead of maybe taking the full blame or maybe just saying, you know what, I got to make a better throw. And just leaving it at that, but then kind of taking it behind closed doors to talk about it. This is where, in my opinion, you have to understand the personalities. You have to understand how to lead individuals, different individuals. People will respond differently to different styles of leadership. Now, I don't want to point the finger at Rodgers. I don't want to point the finger at Mike Williams. I don't want to point the finger at Driver or Jennings or anything like that. But I think this is an example of knowing how you can motivate people and how you can lead people. And I go back, and I'm not saying this is an exact comparison, but I go back to a story that Bart Starr always told about Vince Lombardi. And how there was, times at practice that Bart Starr was just getting chewed out by Lombardi, getting chewed out at practice. And Starr would always tell this story. It's one of my favorite stories. That he went in to Lombardi's office after practice and said, if you want to chew me out, I've got no problem with that. I can take it. But if you're going to chew me out, do it in your office, not in front of the team. If you expect me to lead this group, chew me out in your office and not in front of the team. And Starr said Lombardi never chewed him out in front of the team ever again. I bring that up because that's another example of learning or knowing how to lead in different ways. Some will respond to public criticism, and that's how they get motivated. That's how they are led. That's how they'll focus or whatever. Some won't. And some won't lead that way. But it's up to the leader. It's up to that captain. It's up to that in this case, that quarterback, to understand how your teammates get motivated, to how to lead your individual teammates, because not everybody's going to be the same. And I don't know if maybe Aaron didn't know how to lead certain people. Maybe he just has the one mindset, and it's like, get on board. This is how we do it. This is how I do it. If you're not with me, you're kind of against me, or you're going to have to fall in line. It worked for some. Obviously, it's worked for some players. It's worked for some teammates. For others, it didn't. Not saying it's right or wrong. But I'll admit, when that first 11 years ago, when it came out, when this whole drama sort of stuff started happening, as a fan, I'm like, no, I got the quarterback's back. I've got Aaron's back. I mean, these guys are just, what are they doing? They're messing with the hand that's feeding them. That's the reason they're winning games and they're winning Super Bowls. And all he's doing is trying to hold people accountable. He's trying to be a leader. But as time has passed, I've softened on that stance. Now, I don't necessarily agree with, everything Jennings said, or I don't necessarily agree with the way it's been thrown out there or the platforms and that sort of stuff. But I've softened on that stance because I truly believe people are led differently and in different ways. And it's up to a great leader, whether it's a coach or whether it's a player, to understand how different players get motivated. It's like in business with your bosses. You want a boss that can lead the right way, but have the ability to lead in different ways. Not just, we all want to, there's probably certain situations, whether it's jobs now, jobs in the past, or whatever, where you've had that boss like, gosh, I can't stand working with him because he didn't like the way they led, or they didn't like the way they were leading your teammates, or, weren't very open and stuff. And I think, honestly, when we see this stuff, and I get what Ryan Fitzpatrick is saying, like, Fitzpatrick was probably of the mindset, or this is how he was as he was a quarterback. He probably went up if there was a bad play. My bad. You hear coaches say this all the time, right? When coaches go up to the podium after a loss, what do they usually say? It's on me. It's on our coaching staff. We got to coach better. We got to prepare our guys better. That's usually one of the first things they say after a loss. Loss is on us. Loss is on me. That might not be the message, and likely so. That's probably not the message that is being sent in meetings, behind closed doors, that sort of stuff. But coaches aren't going to throw their players under the bus in front of reporters and public and the fans, ultimately. Not too often, I shouldn't say it hasn't never happened, but not too often are you going to have a coach go out there and say, yeah, the reason we lost today was because Jordan Love was just awful. Jordan Love is the reason why we lost today's game. You're not going to see that too often. Or sometimes maybe you can read a little bit in between the lines. So I think, when I've softened my stance after, now you're seeing this, and now I'm kind of like that. What Driver said, I remember when Driver came out with those comments. I'm like, okay, and then Driver didn't really get a lot of flack like Jennings did from Packers fans because he's down Driver, right? He's like one of the ultimate Packers, favorite Packers all time. So he had that. He kind of had that already on, and it helped. But now, when I saw Fitz say that, and then I listened to that, I'm like, okay, it makes more sense what Driver was saying. It makes more sense what Driver was saying. And I think when you go, and Driver had the unique, and Jennings did for a little bit too, but Driver had the unique experience of playing with both Favre and Rodgers. And we know that Favre and Rodgers are two completely different styles of quarterbacks. Favre, gunslinging, he'd throw it up, he'd give his receivers a shot to make a play, even if they were in triple coverage. And a lot of times, Favre would take the blame and take the heat because sometimes they were just stupid throws, and he knew it, but he would take it. Rodgers, more calculated. Didn't want to make mistakes. Didn't want to throw interceptions. The whole trust factor, right? So, yeah, receivers probably appreciated more. Jennings and Driver probably appreciated more playing. And I'm not saying they didn't like playing for Rodgers. I mean, Rodgers helped them win a Super Bowl. But, Favre probably took a lot of the heat off those guys a little bit because, I mean, he's Favre and he's, my bad, I shouldn't throw that or something like that. Everybody responds differently to leadership in that. And I think, and I don't want to, Aaron's obviously been doing this for a long time. He's a Hall of Famer. He's a, all that stuff. But if there's one criticism maybe on him is like, maybe be a little bit more adaptable to how you lead your teammates in terms of the public perception. Like, I get it. Okay, you're right. Mike Williams ran the wrong route. But was that necessarily the best way to go about it in a public forum? Because he's Aaron Rodgers, and whatever he says, fans are usually going to gravitate. If you're a fan of the Jets, or in our case, for a lot of us, when it happened with Packers, you're going to gravitate towards Aaron and be on his side. And you're putting that teammate and you're putting that player in a really awkward position. Yeah, he may have screwed up. He may have did something wrong. Not only are you, in the fact that, okay, you already annoyed your quarterback, you made him upset, you probably, frustrated your teammates, and now you're kind of getting thrown under the bus in the public in that. As a quarterback, go up there and say, you know what, bad throw, or you know what, we just didn't make it. We just didn't make the play happen, and leave it at that. And then talk to the guy behind. Have your back. Have his back. It's because sometimes it seems like he doesn't have. Yeah, you threw in, hey, I love Mike, and he's done some nice things for us. It's like the whole, no offense, but sort of thing. So when I saw that again, just to kind of wrap it up, what Fitzpatrick, I'm like, okay, the driver and Jennings stuff make a little bit more sense now. And now I understand what they were trying to say. Because there was an example of it, and somebody pointed that out, and then it's like, ooh, after 11 years, I kind of know now what they were saying. Wasn't like that for every teammate, though, obviously. Look at the Jordys, look at the Randall Cobbs, look at the Devontaes. You know, that sort of stuff. Just thought it was kind of interesting. I just thought it was kind of interesting to see that perspective. Again, not everybody's the same. Not everybody's going to lead the same. And not everybody's going to respond to the same leadership. But for me, good leaders, whether it's in teams, whether it's teams or whether it's businesses, good leaders know how to lead different individuals in different ways. It goes back to like the Mike Daniels. Remember Mike Daniels for Green Bay? And Mike Daniels was a very vocal leader, right? Very animated. Very pumped up. Very amped up. And I remember there was I don't know if it was like a column or report or whatever, but there was this something where, yeah, there were some guys in the locker room that didn't really like how Mike Daniels was going about leading. They weren't all about the yelling and the jacked up, intense sort of thing. That's how Mike Daniels led. That doesn't mean everybody responds to that same type of leadership. He may lead some, but he's not going to lead all. But I was going through this, and I go back to the Lombardi and Starr story. And that was one way to lead Starr. You can criticize me. Take it. I'll take it. But his thought process was, don't embarrass me in front of my teammates. Because if you're chewing me out in front of my teammates, or you're throwing me out under the bus in front of my teammates, how are they going to respond to me on the field, being their quarterback, being their leader? And I would have to agree with Starr. I'd have to agree with Bart Starr. I mean, I don't want to get chewed out in front of my coworkers for my boss. If I did something wrong, pull me off to the side. Talk to me about it. I don't want to be embarrassed. And I don't know, I'm sure some of it is because of the Devontae Adams acquisition, but Mike Williams wasn't at practice yesterday, as they said, for personal reasons, and now he's on a trading block. Don't know if it's, connecting the dots there, but all right, let's take a quick break, and let's talk about this Packers-Texans game coming up after these quick words. You may think it's impossible to save some money with your grocery bill and at the gas pump all at the same time. But with Hy-Vee and Eau Claire, it's not. Take advantage of the great deals and the savings at Hy-Vee and Eau Claire while also earning money at the gas pump with Hy-Vee Perks. And don't forget, Hy-Vee and Eau Claire is your tailgating headquarters. Whether you're looking for food, beverages, or apparel to represent your favorite team, including your high school, Hy-Vee and Eau Claire has you covered. Tailgate this season with Hy-Vee in Eau Claire. We're getting set for another busy travel season, vacations, taking our kids to all their games and activities, and you need a proper vehicle to get you to where you're going, and safely. That's where Toyson Ford can help you. Toyson Ford will go the extra mile to provide you with compelling options for new and used car shopping. They will gladly work with you on financing no matter what your budget may be. They're committed to giving drivers across the Chippewa Valley the best in customer service. Check them out for yourself. Visit Toyson Ford in Chippewa Falls today and check out their website, toysonford.net. Let's do it. Let's break it down. Packers, Texans, Sunday, Lambeau Field, noon kickoff. Kind of surprised it's noon kickoff, but I'm going to tell you, I'm not complaining right now. So, how do these teams match up? Well, we know, they're two of the younger teams out there, led by two young quarterbacks. C.J. Stroud, I think, really surprised a lot of people, even being second overall pick, surprised a lot of people with his play last year as a rookie, and so far this year is still playing at a high level. Texans, in the offseason, one of those teams too making moves. Daniel Hunter, Stephon Diggs to kind of push for it, go for it, while you got C.J. Stroud under a rookie contract. And right now you look at the Texans. I mean, one loss. They're 5-1. Their lone loss coming from the Minnesota Vikings. How do they stack up offensively, defensively, compared to the rest of the league? I think it's fair to say that the Texans are one of the more well-rounded, complete teams in the National Football League in terms of offense and defense. Offensively, they're just outside the top 5 in yards per game. They're sixth in the entire league in yards per game. Green Bay is a top 5 team. They're 4th in the National Football League in yards per game. The leader is still Baltimore, 453.7 yards per game. Green Bay's got 400.8. Houston coming in at 375.2. But then defensively, you look at yards allowed per game, and Houston is a top 3 defense in that department. Houston is only giving up 277 yards per game, which is, when you look at, you're like, well, who's the number 1 team? Tennessee, 248.8. Then you got the Jets at second place there with 273. So, you're talking about a top 10 offense, top 5 defense right now for the Houston Texans in terms of yards allowed per game. Let's go back to the Texans offense here and kind of highlight some of this. Now, it obviously is a big loss for the Texans to not have Nico Collins. Nico Collins was off to an absolutely fantastic and hot start to this season. But they got other weapons on this ball club here too. And they got Joe Mixon back. And Joe Mixon coming off of a very good game going up against the Patriots. You still got Stephon Diggs, who is very familiar with going up against Green Bay and Jair, during his time with Minnesota and such. So, they, even though, Nico is banged up and such, they got other weapons in this for this Texans team. So they obviously have to account for that. They got guys who could step up into that role and try to fill in for Nico Collins. Nico Collins is a premier player, no doubt about it, but they got other options they can go to. And within this style of offense, which is similar to Green Bay's, you got Bobby Slowick Jr. That name sounds familiar. Yes, former Packers defensive coordinator back in the day. His dad was. But Bobby Slowick Jr., again, come under the tutelage of Kyle Shanahan and was actually on the same staff with Matt LaFleur when they were in Washington, but he was a defensive assistant, defensive quality control, I believe, off the top of my head. But then goes to San Francisco and becomes an offensive-minded coach and now an offensive coordinator with the Texans. So obviously similar concepts to what Green Bay runs and what Matt LaFleur wants to do over there too. So you got that, but I think when you look at this and when you kind of break it down here a little bit individually in terms of the Texans offense, they are a top, just outside. No, they are top 5. They are a top 5 team in terms of passing yards per game, 256.3. The only teams higher than them, Seattle, San Francisco, Dallas, and Detroit. Green Bay, for comparison, 6, 7, 8, 9. Green Bay's 10th in passing yards per game. Now, when you get to rushing yards per game, Green Bay is 2nd overall at this point. Houston's about middle of the pack. But right now, Houston is still putting up 118 yards per game on the ground. Points, you're looking at Green Bay being 2, 4, 6. Okay, so they're a top 10 team in terms of points per game. They're scoring 27 points per game. Houston, about middle of the pack there. They're about 23.8 points per game. So that's where they're at offensively with this thing. And I think, it's still going to start with stopping the run. Don't let Joe Mixon go off and have himself a day. He's coming off that nice performance against the New England Patriots. So He was banged up a little bit before that, missed the Minnesota game. Not saying he would have been the biggest factor, would have completely changed that game against Minnesota. The way Minnesota was playing that game, I don't think that would have been the case by any means. But when you look at what Mixon has done so far this year, he's played 3 games, 286 yards. He's averaging 5.5 yards per carry. So he's averaging 5.5 yards per carry at this point. That's pretty darn solid for the former Cincinnati Bengal. So I think you still have to look at this and prepare for Mixon, because in his 3 games, he opened up the season against the Colts and he ran the ball 30 times for 159 yards. The Bears were able to slow him down slightly. He only had 9 carries for 25 yards. I mean, not a lot of production, not a lot of opportunities over there. Then he gets hurt, misses some time, and then bounces back last week with that nice performance. The other thing, too, with Mixon that you got to be aware of, Mixon in the passing game, too. I mean, he's a running back that can catch the ball out of the backfield, can make some plays in that passing game. So that's something Green Bay's got to be aware of. He's averaging 9.3 yards per catch so far this season. So something to keep an eye on, especially with Nico Collins missing this game for the Texans and such. Stephon Diggs, you look at the numbers, what he has done so far this year, it's probably not going to blow you away a whole lot because Nico was on such a fantastic start to the season. But, I mean, I got to imagine Stephon Diggs thinking, knowing that he's going to be going up against Jair and him. They've had their battles and their trash talks back and forth and that. I got to imagine Stephon Diggs is going to be like, all right, here we go. This is my time. I got to step it up. I got to be the guy in this game. Let's go. He's got 392 yards on 37 catches so far. Does have 3 touchdowns this season too. Tank Dell, pay attention to that guy. But also, talking about running backs who can catch the ball out of the backfield and such and be effective in the passing game, former Badger running back Dario Ogunbowale is somebody to pay attention to as well. In 6 games as a running back, he's got 15 catches on 16 targets for 155 yards. That's a 10.3 average. So, Packers have to be aware of that former Badger over there, too. Dalton Schultz, the tight end, he's a guy. Probably remember him more during his time with the Cowboys a few years ago and such. But he's a guy that could go off in a game there, too. And then your quarterback, C.J. Stroud. 6th in the league in passing yards. He's got 10 touchdown passes so far this year. 4 interceptions. 4 interceptions on the season. So far this year, C.J. Stroud, if you're looking at, big topic every week, heading up and going up against an offense has been, well, is this a week that maybe Green Bay can get after the quarterback and maybe Green Bay can rack up some sack numbers going up against this Houston Texans line? Well, so far this year, C.J. Stroud has been sacked 16 times. Last year he was sacked 38 times. But so far in 6 games, he has been sacked 16 times. Just to kind of put it in a little bit of a comparison here, Jordan Love in 4 games has been sacked 4 times. So there's going to be an opportunity for these pass rushers, I think, to get after C.J. Stroud. And that, to me, is going to be a key to victory for the game for the Packers here. C.J. Stroud is not the biggest rushing quarterback in the league. This year, he's got 17 carries, 75 yards. That's an average of 4.4, which is on pace to what he did last year. Last year, 39 carries, $167, 4.3. So he's kind of like Jordan Love in that essence of not the biggest rusher, but he could pick up some yards with his legs if he needs to. He's not going to be a Lamar. He's not going to be a Kyler Murray. He's not going to be an Anthony Richardson. He's not going to be one of those type of running quarterbacks, not even like a Josh Allen. So I think a key to this game is going to have to be that Packers front, that pressure. Can they generate pressure and get after C.J. Stroud so he's not comfortable behind the line of scrimmage, so he doesn't have time to find guys like Stephon Diggs. Get after him and take him down. Make him feel uncomfortable back there. Always have that consistent pressure on him. That, to me, is going to be a key in this game, is if that Packers defense can get after it. Will it be something similar to the Tennessee game where they had 8 sacks and just constantly pressured Will Levis? I think a lot of us would love 8 sacks in this game, but I think it's also fair to say Packers and Jeff Hafley may respect C.J. Stroud a little bit more than Will Levis. I mean, C.J. Stroud's a pretty darn good quarterback, but I think you have to provide some consistent pressure against C.J. Stroud so you don't make him comfortable behind that pocket so he can't pick apart the defense and find guys like Stephon Diggs and some other receivers like Dalton Schultz or Tank Dell or even Joe Mixon or Ogumba Wale. So that's one key for me. And plus, I mean, you also have to factor in slowing down Joe Mixon, not allowing him to get comfortable and not allowing him to go out there and run the ball all over the place. Now, the other factor, really quick, I forgot to bring this up, going back to C.J. Stroud. According to Pro Football Focus, C.J. Stroud is the top quarterback going up against the blitz this season. He is the top quarterback going up against the blitz this season. So that's why I think it's more important to provide that pressure with your 4, with your down 4, maybe even just your 5, without having to bring extra blitzers, without having to bring extra guys. If you can get home with your front, with your 4, 5 down linemen, that's where it's going to be important. Otherwise, C.J. Stroud so far this year has picked apart blitzing defenses. So providing that pressure without bringing extra blitzers is going to be important for Green Bay in this game. Doing that, slowing down Joe Mixon, not allowing him to run free on that defense, and essentially really making the play-action game a thing for the Texans. Because if they're going to have success running the ball with Joe Mixon, it turns that play-action game into a threat for that Texans offense. Packers offensively, going up against this Texans defense. What are going to be the keys? Well, obviously one thing is going to be keeping Jordan Love clean again. And for the most part, I mean, 4 games and 4 sacks. Yeah, he's been pressured here and there. But for the most part, they've kept him clean. And that's a credit, too, to Jordan Love for getting the ball out quick. Right? And I mean, that's a credit over there, too. When you look at this defense so far for the Texans, they've recorded 19 sacks so far this season. 19 sacks with D'Amico Ryan's defense. When you're looking at some of those guys on that roster, I mean, you've got Will Anderson Jr., who is off to, I mean, you want to talk about another youngster who is off to a fantastic start. Will Anderson Jr. has already got 5.5 sacks so far this year. That's tied for the 5th most in the league. So definitely have to be aware of that. Have to be aware of Will Anderson Jr. When you look at sacks, Houston is 2 for 6th most in the entire league. 6th most in the entire league in terms of sacks. Chicago's right there at 18. Baltimore, actually they're tied for 5th because Baltimore has 19 sacks as well. So Green Bay, outside the top 10, they're 16. So kind of put that into, I mean, maybe that surprises people when you say, Green Bay maybe just outside top 10 in terms of sacks there. But Will Anderson Jr., know where that guy is. Know where he's going to be lined up. Danielle Hunter. Packers are very familiar with their time against Danielle Hunter. The longtime Minnesota Viking. He's got 2.5 sacks so far this season. That's where the main guys are going to be coming from. The edges. Zach Tom, Rasheed Walker, those guys. You have to pay attention to where they're at. And, Zach Tom, I feel like, Zach Tom's going to do a fairly good job over there. I mean, he's been pretty darn good outside of the Rams game, which was just kind of a fluke maybe for Zach Tom. He bounced back nicely against Arizona. But Zach Tom has been a pretty darn solid player so far this year. You feel good about him over there, maybe going up against Will Anderson Jr. I think the big one might be Danielle Hunter if he's going to be lined up on Walker, or if they move Will Anderson Jr. around and they line him up over Walker. Will the Packers have to have a chip going against one of those guys, or can that offensive line hold their own without having to sacrifice an extra pass catcher to be a blocker like a tight end or anything like that? But you look at Houston's defense overall, and they're solid across the board. We went through their total yards, ranking and such. But when you break it down in terms of passing and rushing defense, if you want to break it down a little bit more like that, Houston, in terms of passing yards allowed per game, Houston's a top 5 team. They're 4th in the league in terms of allowing passing yards through the air, 163.2. 163.2. The 3 teams ahead of them is Tennessee, the Jets, and the Miami Dolphins over there. Rushing yards allowed per game. This is where Houston's about middle of the pack. They're giving up 113.8 on the ground this year. Green Bay's actually better than them. Green Bay giving up 110. But I think it's fair to say, though, too, Green Bay is going to be throwing the football. When you look at this, I mean, we've done this against Arizona. We've done this against the Rams and all that. And, it's like, it looks like this is a game for Green Bay to really run the football. And they've tried. It's not like Josh Jacobs the last couple of weeks has gone off and, being named FedEx Ground Player of the Week and that. Green Bay's still going to throw the football. And to me, that's going to be a key in this one is Green Bay's passing offense. How much success are they going to have against the 4th best pass defense in the league in terms of yards given up? It's going to be Matt LaFleur versus, D'Amico Ryans and such. That to me is going to be a fascinating chess match in terms of a great offensive play caller, a great offensive-minded head coach going up against a great defensive-minded head coach. I'm a big fan of D'Amico Ryans, and he has shown that he is already a year and a half into his tenure as a full-time head coach. He has proven that he is a pretty darn good coach, and you look at his years of being a defensive coordinator with the 49ers, he's proven to be a pretty darn good defensive play caller too. So for me, this is going to be such an interesting matchup. Both play callers for each team. LaFleur and going up against D'Amico and the Texans defense. But then Jeff Hafley going up against, Bobby Sloak Jr., a guy, a young offensive-minded play caller who is towards the top of prospective head coaches in this league. Got interviews already last year. Anybody who wants to pick another apple from that Shanahan tree, they're going to look at Bobby Sloak Jr. Very similar styles, especially in the offensive side. Which one is going to have the advantage here? But I'm really looking forward to that Packers offense going up against this Texans defense. Knowing, Texans defense, they're familiar with a lot of that concepts. So what else is Matt LaFleur going to do to keep them on their heels, to keep them guessing, trying to confuse them, trying to stay that one step ahead? That to me is a key here too. I think it's setting up to, at least on paper, it looks like a fantastic matchup all across the board when you factor everything in. Now, as a Packers fan, I hope it's a blowout victory for the Packers. I hope it's just pure domination with the Texans coming to town. I hope it's pure domination from Green Bay. And when you look at the Texans, I know this isn't maybe the tell-all of tell-alls, but they've played in some really tight games except for a couple of them. Their blowout loss to the Vikings, it was 34-7. They beat the Patriots 41-21 last week. Colts, it went down to the wire, 29-27. Bears, they escaped with a victory against the Bears, 19-13. They escaped against the Jaguars, 24-20. They beat the Bills, 23-20. Now they're going up against a pretty darn good team with Green Bay. Playing, I think now, you look at what Jordan Love did last couple weeks, looking a little bit more comfortable, looking healthier, maybe getting that rust knocked off. You're seeing some young guys on the defensive side, maybe Jeff Hafley, settling into a rhythm as well, especially figuring out his rotations and such. It's going to be a tough matchup for both of these ball clubs. One player really quick, too, that I want to talk about is Keyshawn Nixon. And we talked a little bit about Keyshawn Nixon earlier. But Keyshawn is a guy that is, I don't know if there's like a middle ground with him in terms of from Packers fans. I feel like Packers fans really like him, or they're very indifferent. I don't think nobody dislikes him or anything like that. I hope not. But I think you look at if you are a believer in advanced statistics and numbers, analytics, he's having a pretty darn solid season. And Aaron Schatz, formerly of Football Outsiders DVOA, okay, you've probably heard of that. He's been on this with the last few days about how good of a season Keyshawn Nixon is having. And he broke down the numbers. Coverage DVOA. Comparing these three. Coverage DVOA with 3 Packers corners with at least 100 coverage snaps. So you don't want a higher number. Higher the number means giving up more passes. Okay? Eric Stokes is a plus 40%. Keyshawn Nixon is a minus 31%. Jair is a minus 37%. By that metric, Keyshawn Nixon is having a much better season in coverage than what Eric Stokes is. So, to me, that's going to be interesting to maybe watch 25 a little bit more. And we saw it last week against Arizona, where Keyshawn started to get snaps on the outside along with Jair, and then Javon Bullard, safety playing a little bit of that slot nickel role. Evan Williams playing more snaps at safety. Eric Stokes, snaps cut. Carrington Valentine, snaps cut. Are we going to see that trend continue here too? But Keyshawn Nixon might be a guy to kind of just out. We know him about his returnability, and we know him about his special teams and that. But maybe we got to start watching 25 on the defensive side a little bit more too. I think, if I pick an offensive player and a defensive player in this thing for players to watch, I think defensively, I'm going to go Rashawn Gary. Because, Rashawn Gary might have had his best game of the season last week. Didn't put up any sacks, but he had was it the best run grade according to Pro Football Focus, had the most pressures. I think Green Bay's defense has to get home or has to provide some consistent pressure against C.J. Stroud without bringing extra blitzers, because that's how Stroud has been killing some of these defenses, is when they're bringing the extra blitz and extra blitzers. So Green Bay's got to get home with 4 or 5. And that's got to come from guys like Rashawn Gary. I want to see Rashawn Gary going out there and wrecking this game, being a force, providing consistent pressure. It's not going to happen on every snap. But I want to see Rashawn Gary now. Okay, you had a good game last week. May not show it in the box score, but when you kind of really break it down, he had a solid game last week. Let's take it another step now. Let's stack that success. Win your one-on-ones. Yep, you know what? You're probably going to continue to get shipped like you have been a lot this year. But let's go and wreck this thing. Let's go after Stroud. Beat the guy across from you and provide that pressure. Rashawn Gary is my defensive pick for player to watch. I want to see it happen this week against Houston. Because if he can provide some consistent pressure, if that defensive front overall can provide that consistent pressure against C.J. Stroud, make him uncomfortable back there. Don't let him be comfortable and sit back in that pocket and let him pick apart. Allow Stephon Diggs to find those open spots, to get open, or where he is Dare Ogunbowale for a little dink and dunk pass, or Dalton Schultz across the middle from tight end, Tank Dell, whatever. Provide some pressure on him, but without bringing those extra blitzers. Offensively, I'm going to go a little bit different route. I'm going to go Rasheed Walker in this, because Turner right now for the Texans, their edge rusher, second-year guy. First of all, the Texans knocked him out of the park, it looks like, for their draft last year with obviously C.J. Stroud. But then, I was reading a quick text. Apologies. But, you look at what the Texans have done these last years in the draft, hitting it on the C.J. Stroud. And, boy, that C.J. Stroud stuff last year leading into that draft looks absolutely ridiculous, where he could fall. And, is he going to – he's an Ohio State quarterback. Is he going to succeed? Dude is blowing it out of the water right now. But then what did the Texans also do after C.J. Stroud? They're like, okay, we got our quarterback now. We're going to go get our defensive player. And Will Anderson Jr. is having a fantastic year too. 5.5 sacks so far. 9 tackles for loss. 9 tackles for loss for Will Anderson Jr. And he's got Danielle Hunter on the other side, which Packers are very familiar with from his time with the Vikings. But I'm going to say Rasheed Walker at this point, because I've got confidence in Zach Tom over on the right side. And assuming DeMeco Ryans and assuming the Texans are going to move some of their guys around, their edge rushers around a little bit, assuming that Will Anderson's going to be lined up against Rasheed Walker, it's going to be important for Rasheed Walker to win a lot of those matchups without having maybe a tight end helping him out, a running back helping him out, without a lot of chips going over there. I'm sure the Packers are going to employ that. But Walker's got to continue to keep Jordan Love clean. Jordan Love's been sacked 4 times in 4 games this year. By comparison, C.J. Stroud's been sacked 16 times in 6 games. Do the math. Does 2 games equal 12 sacks? Probably not. So C.J. Stroud's been sacked more than Jordan Love this year. But don't let Will Anderson take over. Kind of like what we were saying with Rashawn Gary. Don't let Will Anderson do that for the Texans' defensive front. And if he is lined up against Walker quite a bit, Walker's got to do, he's got to have his head on a swivel. He's got to play a solid game to help keep Jordan Love clean and not under pressure. Allow Jordan Love to get the ball out to Jaden Reed. And if that deep ball's not going to be there, able to let some plays develop and getting the ball out to his playmakers. So I'm going to go a little bit of a different route here. I'm going to stay within the trenches with my offensive player to watch. I'm going to go with Rasheed Walker, assuming that he's going to be lined up. Well, even if it is Danielle Hunter. I mean, Danielle Hunter's got 2.5 sacks this year too. But going up against one of those guys, whether it's Anderson or Danielle Hunter. So my players to watch, Rashawn Gary on the defensive side and Rasheed Walker. I'll throw an honorable mention one in here just because he's new. Our new kicker, Brandon McManus. You know, what if he's in a situation where 5 seconds left in the game, Packers are down 1, 45-yard field goal? We're all going to be holding our breath. I mean, regardless of who the kicker's in that situation, we're all probably holding our breath at that point. But might be holding it a little bit more because we've been down this road the last couple years with kickers missing kicks in that situation. He's a bit of an unknown. We haven't seen him in a Packers uniform. He hasn't kicked this year since off-season stuff. So this is our first glimpse of him. So he's kind of an honorable mention one for me. And I think the biggest thing here too with McManus, you look at what he has done from the 40 to 49 yard field goals, because that, for whatever reason, that was Anders' issue. Anders has a leg. He's got the distance. That was an issue. Narveson has a leg, but it was the 40 to 49 yard. And when you look at it, and this is from Zach Cruz, Carlson and Narveson from last year to this year, field goals from 40 to 49, 52.9% between Carlson and Narveson. When you look at McManus' career, 85.7%. You're talking 52.9% compared to 55.7%. That is a huge difference. And you hope that is a difference that we will still see with, again, a kicker who hasn't kicked in a game yet this year. But you look at it history-wise, because that's the frustrating ones, right? I mean, if a kicker's missing 58, 59, like, okay, that's a long distance. It's the 40 to 49 that's like, okay, or even like 38, 30. Dude, you want your kickers to be able to, get in the, at least have an 80, close to 90%. I know the league averages, I think, is like 78, 77% from 40 to 49. That's where the frustration comes from when you are missing, one, your extra points because they're a little bit longer, but those 40 to 49-yard field goals. And if you're only hitting half of that, you're not doing your job. So I hope that's the biggest difference we see. Not just, making more kicks overall. It's that 40 to 49-yard range. Because that's the frustrating one. You can make up an excuse, or you can, give them a little bit of a leeway with those long distance 58, 59-yarders. But if you're consistently missing something in a range that you've got to hit 9 times out of 10, 8 times out of 10, whatever, that's where the frustration point comes from. So that's my honorable mention, Brandon McManus. See what we got with him. All right, that is going to do it for us on this episode of the Man Cave Podcast, brought to you by our good friends from Hy-Vee and Toyson Ford. As always, don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Man Cave Podcast. Don't forget to turn on the automatic download so you never miss another episode. Till next time, I'm Dan Casper, and I will talk to you on the next episode of the Man Cave Podcast.